I'm Jan Darash and welcome to World Talks. My guest today doesn't need any introduction. He is Professor Norman Davies, eminent Professor of Polish History at Oxford University and other places. So welcome to the programme.
Hello. Yes.
Our subject today is the papacy, generally speaking, the papacy and Ukraine. What are your views on the new Pope and his chances of making any sort of inroads into this Orthodox Christian world?
Well, it's very interesting indeed that the Pope has chosen to address Ukraine so early in his papacy, and religion is very central to the present conflict. It's not true, as we used to be told, that all Ukrainians are Orthodox, the reality is that there are several sorts of Orthodox. The Russian Orthodox Church is just one which historically was imposed by force in Tsarist and later in Soviet times. There's an autarkic Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but there's a very strong Greek Catholic community, especially in Western Ukraine, and these are the particular interest of the Catholic Pope. That they are Catholics, they recognise the Pope as a patriarch, but they've preserved the old Byzantine rite, and they historically have been greatly persecuted by the Russian Church and by the Tsar, and in fact by the Soviet Union. The Greek Catholic, or Uniate Church as it used to be called, has suffered greatly, and support from the Pope is very symbolic of Ukraine belonging to the Western world, as opposed to the Russian-dominated orbit. It's very interesting that Putin, who doesn't strike me as particularly Christian, has nonetheless revived, the religious card, and using the Patriarch of Moscow as a sort of political instrument in his war on Ukraine, blessing the troops as they go into battle and so on. So I think the new Pope is, as well, throwing his weight onto the other side, and the main thing is demonstrating that Ukraine isn't isolated, that Ukraine has support.
I suppose that one of the, perhaps a comparison that may be an easy one, a facile one, is to compare John Paul II's political impact here in the communist world with a potential impact of Leo XIV. Is that too easy a comparison to make?
That's a long shot. Poland is much more coherent religiously than Ukraine, and John Paul, being Polish, was talking, as it were, to the whole Polish nation and so on. Whereas the new American, again very interesting, an American Pope stepping into the Ukrainian theatres, it's more complicated, but I think the effect will be very strong, especially on the Russians. They will see, this Western religious leader stepping onto their turf as though they have a sort of a right to dominate, and so it is very political. If you like, it's sort of cultural diplomacy or religious diplomacy But like John Paul II, it is very powerful, I think.
Does the history of the Vatican style of diplomacy, does the Pope take the long view, the view of generations and hundreds of years? Is it too much for us to expect almost instantaneous effects from this?
Traditionally, the papacy has stayed in the shadows. They haven't, popes in the past have been very reluctant to show their hands publicly and what they're doing. John Paul II was an exception, like he was a breath of fresh air when he came. And it looks as though the new American Pope, with a lot of experience in Latin America, is also very politically aware and prepared to show his hand.
What's the position of diplomacy generally nowadays in the Russo-Ukrainian war? Does it have any traction, or is it purely now a question of advancing on the battlefield, leaving diplomacy aside?
Diplomacy has been expelled or kept at arm's length, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago. The Americans have tried to play a diplomatic hand, but very incompetently. What exactly Trump thinks he's doing, or who he's supporting or trying to help, it's anybody's guess. The new American administration is not very competent, I don't think, in international affairs. But they of course, are a strong player, and I fear for what the results of this diplomacy will be.
Does Poland have it? Poland seems to have a history, or does have a history of effective diplomacy, certainly 15th, 16th centuries. Is that a call for Poland to step up and reassume its historic role in Eastern Europe?
Well, the Polish Commonwealth, you're going back as far as the 17th and 18th century, the largest state in the region, well, but in fact in Europe, is seen by the Russians as a historical rival. The state they overturned to create Moscow's supremacy. So the Russians will be very sensitive to any signs that the Poles are somehow reviving ancient ambitions. I don't think Poland has any strong ambitions in the region, except for being a defensive force and a political player. It's very noticeable that the role of Poland is becoming more and more prominent, and for obvious reasons, with Poland being Ukraine's neighbour, it is one of the major players.
Does the Polish elite have this historical background on which to draw for its?
I think the Poles themselves, the political parties, are very divided over Ukraine. The Polish right wing tends to be pretty suspicious of anything Ukrainian, and that there was, alas, a long history of Polish-Ukrainian conflicts, and that is easily revived. The present government, headed by Donald Tusk, is fairly open-minded about it, but all Polish governments have to be very careful.
Yes.
And we'll see. The Poles, the present government is very careful not to act on its own. It's acting together with its European partners. And that, I think, is very wise.
A final question to you, Professor Davies. You wrote in History Reclaimed an interesting essay about the manipulation of Russian history in its narrative. How does that, that still seems to be playing a very major role in forming the modern Russian consciousness? Yes,
Putin has formed a very strong view of Russian history, going back. He's sort of gone back a century, to, as it were, Tsarist view of the world, in which, as I said, the Orthodox Church is part of it, but the Russian imperialism, the role of Russia as the leader of the Slav nation, the old pan-Slavism, it's all there. And Putin wrote this extraordinary essay, which was given to every Russian soldier on the way to Ukraine, saying that, Ukraine is not a real country, it's no right to exist, and we are asserting, Russia's right to dominance and to this particular view of history, which it's falsification on a massive scale, but it's what Russians have been fed with for, forever.
Yes, we're still on that fault line, aren't we, between East and West in Europe?
Yeah. I think the pluralism, the pluralist picture of religion in Ukraine shows that the old dividing line is not as clear-cut as it used to be. And that's something which, of course, Putin he doesn't like. Like he wants to restore the monolith of Russianness in Ukraine and all across Russia.
Professor Norman Davies, thank you very much for coming on to the programme. Great to have you. So that's all we have time for today. Join us next time on World Talks. I'm Jan Darasz. See you then.